Hello everyone, I'm Stibby, and this is my YouTube channel. I wanted to talk to you today about the video game of the future, an exciting innovation called FMV games.
I am your passport to the future.
A friend.
Relax. Pretend it's a game.
A boss.
Hi there. I'm Commissioner Stibby.
And a reason to live.
Podcast! Stay cool. Don't let them freak out. Shake the tooth, dog meat!
To explain FMV games, I need only quote former Senator Joseph Lieberman on the trial for violent video games that took place in the 90's. These games use actual actors and achieve an unprecedented level of realism. Lieberman was, at the time, only referring to the game Night Trap, and, to be fair, have you seen Night Trap? It looks extremely realistic.
Now listen up. Last night one of our agents got into the house and found some kind of weird security system. Hidden cameras in almost every room and a series of traps. Our agent spliced an override into the security system, allowing you to have control of the cameras and the traps with this remote unit.
It's like I'm there. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot that some of you might not be acclimated to FMV games, and therefore don't have the resistances that I've built up. It's okay. Those people weren't in the room with you right now. They're just on a computer screen. FMV is an abbreviation for full motion video, which is basically just a term for anything in a video game that is a pre-rendered video file instead of something done in engine. So you can take FMV to generally mean any game consisting primarily or entirely of these video files, with very little done in engine. An example that people might know that aren't familiar with the live-action stuff would be the Don Bluth games such as Dragon Slayer. However, I'm going to be using the term FMV colloquially to refer to games that specifically feature live-action sequences in them, because that's what people mean when they refer to FMV games about 80 to 90% of the time. This video is not just about FMV games, though, because that video would be much longer and less interesting to me. This video is specifically about queer themes in FMV games, which means I won't be talking about Night Trap more because it, as far as I remember, doesn't fit in with that purview. Which, to be completely honest, is fine by me. As much as I like FMV games, I don't love Night Trap. The way that game plays is very frustrating to me. Anyway, queer content in FMV games is such an interesting topic to me because there's actually a lot of it. At least what I would consider a disproportionate amount considering how niche FMV games are relatively. They got a little bit of buzz early on in their life as kind of a new thing, but they didn't receive that much in the way of critical reception or sales, especially not when compared to Marios or Dooms that actually influenced industry standards. Even despite that, I had two prominent examples of explicitly queer themes permeating two major FMV game releases of the 90's right off the top of my head. And in researching for this, I found more examples of gay characters and themes in FMV games. It might not seem like a lot, but considering how niche FMV games are, it's kind of wild that they make up a fifth of the Wikipedia page for LGBT characters in games of the 90's. And, in my opinion, make up some of the most blatant examples. That being said, not every example is super positive. A lot of these games go very hard on camp, and the gaming industry was largely dominated by young white cishet men. So there's certainly a few unflattering and caricatured portrayals in these. A little bit of housekeeping before getting into the video proper. You might notice that some of these games are captured in another game. That game is called Tower Unite. They have a system in place where you can legally emulate other games in-engine. Potentially you could also illegally do so, but I wouldn't know anything about that. This is not an ad, I just wanted to explain why some of the footage looks the way that it does. Doing it this way was genuinely the easiest way for me to capture some of this video footage, but so I figured I'd mention something because I figured it'd be kind of fucked up to just do it and not say anything.
I suppose you're wondering what all this stuff is for. Well, you're going to need all of these things and a few more to solve the puzzle of flesh. My name is Rachel Moore, and I'll be your host through this Game Wizard's Guide to Phantasmagoria 2, A Puzzle of Flesh. My favorite psychopath, Curtis Craig, will be the lead role in a bizarre journey of murder, deception, and sex. That's the best part. But we'll get into that later. With my help, you and Curtis will solve a few murders, meet some aliens, and spend some time in a very exclusive nightclub. But you better be careful. You don't want to get too tied up there.
The first game I want to talk about, because it's good to start strong, is Phantasmagoria 2, A Puzzle of Flesh, which is a horror game about a 20-something office worker named Curtis Craig figuring out who he is through murders, BDSM clubs, and aliens. There are a few things I want to address before diving all the way in, though. The first is, I'm aware that Voidburger did a video on the sexual politics of Phantasmagoria 2 already. I haven't watched that video because I've wanted to do this video for a long time, and I didn't want to be influenced or discouraged by it, but I've heard that it's fantastic and that you should watch that as well. The second thing I want to do is shout out the YouTube channel Conversations with Curtis, which is the YouTube channel of Paul Stetler, who is the actor who plays Curtis. The channel has uploaded high-quality versions of some of the game's original footage, and has interviews with many of the game's cast and creators, as well as interviews about Gabriel Knight 2, which is another game I'm going to get to later. If you see footage of Phantasmagoria 2 that looks much better than everything else in this section, it is from the Conversations with Curtis YouTube channel. That channel has been, in general, a valuable resource in making this. So, I have actually known about Phantasmagoria as a game for years. There was a brief mention of it on either some early video game review show, or possibly a G4 show that I watched way back in the day, and it stuck with me. They were specifically talking about the first Phantasmagoria, but they also mentioned that it had a sequel. I didn't really see either Phantasmagoria, but especially not Phantasmagoria 2 in action, however, until the Giant Bomb playthrough, which I think is a lot of people's introduction to the game.
We got a small sense of control over our wildlife.
Get out of here.
This is a fake ball. What?
I said get out of here.
I'm sorry.
Hold it.
Hi. Wait a minute. Can we just absorb that for a moment before we move on to talk to
the chorus line that came through? I'm surprised they weren't singing like, "Watch out, Curtis,
before we talk to
here we go, going to the bar,
like,
don't you know?"
Yeah, before we start chatting with B grade Paul Rudd here, let's
That's where we got to start.
Why were they dancing in unison in the alley?
And even though in that playthrough they were making fun of the game, I kind of fell in love with it. Phantasmagoria 2 is one of the most blatant examples of not only one of the most queer-forward games on this list, but one of the most queer-forward games of the 90's, period. Even from the very beginning, you're introduced to Trevor, who is an openly gay character and Curtis Craig's best friend, but it runs way deeper than that, and even just that would still be notable. You don't see a lot of games or other media where a gay man and a straight man are comfortable with each other and physically affectionate. And Trevor and Curtis's relationship throughout the game is the strongest relationship in Curtis's life by far, way stronger than Curtis's relationship with either of his prospective love interests. Also, Trevor is very likable in his own right. He's somewhat of a fan favorite due to his overwhelming charisma.
I, on the other hand, have a social life.
Uh-huh.
Yes, I was out dancing until dawn. But here I am on time and fresh as a daisy.
Curtis starts the game in a secret office relationship with his girlfriend Jocelyn, but quickly picks up, I guess, an affair with another coworker, Teresa. He says him and Jocelyn aren't exclusive at some point, so your mileage may vary on whether to call it an affair, but he also keeps it a secret from her and keeps her a secret from the office. Plus, she doesn't seem too happy when she finds out he's sleeping with someone else later in the game, so it doesn't seem great. On top of balancing all that, Curtis is also having pretty severe hallucinations that start suddenly one day and are only getting worse. So he decides to go to therapy to deal with that, as well as the emotional trauma that comes with the fact that his coworkers keep dying, because, well, that is another through line throughout the game. And he kind of thinks that he's doing it since he keeps dreaming about the murders the night that they happen. The therapy sessions are where a significant portion of the LGBTQ aspect of the game is set up. From the very first session, you can show Curtis's therapist various items from Curtis's inventory to discuss them. And if you show the therapist the picture of Trevor, Curtis, and Jocelyn together, Curtis says this.
This was taken at our company Christmas party. I had a lot of fun that night, I guess.
Looks like you were having fun. Who are those people with you?
That's Trevor. He's my best friend, and that's Jocelyn. She's my lover.
Are you in love with Jocelyn?
Yeah, I think so. But I'm kind of attracted to Trevor, and that worries me because I don't know if I should be with Jocelyn. I don't want to hurt her, you know?
And that's not a one-off. Curtis continues to discuss his feelings for Trevor and his complex relationship with his sexuality throughout the game. In the next appointment, you can show her that same photo of him, Trevor, and Jocelyn together, and Curtis will express his interest in running away together, just the three of them, and living as a throuple.
This is going to sound really twisted, but sometimes I wish I could just live with Jocelyn and Trevor both. You know? Somewhere far away where no one would judge us and we wouldn't have to see another person.
Many people have fantasies like that, Curtis. Just because it isn't standard behavior in our society doesn't make it wrong.
Non-monogamy also shows up multiple times in the game as a through line, so it could be considered a theme of the game as well, but it is not presented nearly as clearly or completely as queerness is. Something interesting to me is that Phantasmagoria 2 is absolutely steeped in BDSM culture. The woman Curtis starts sleeping with, Teresa, frequents a BDSM club and invites Curtis there. A not insignificant amount of scenes take place there. However, queerness is not exclusively relegated to that world. Don't get me wrong, there is queerness all over the BDSM club. There's people with non-standard gender expressions, women with women, men with men, men flirting with Curtis. Hell, when Curtis tells Teresa that he's pretty serious with Jocelyn, her immediate response is,
I used to bring her along sometimes. She's pretty cute.
And that's not expressed as a fantasy situation to Curtis as much as it is an expression of Teresa's own open sexuality. But even despite the fact that there are queer identities all over the club, Trevor isn't a part of that world at all, and Curtis expresses his attraction to Trevor before getting involved with it. Queerness is shown in every aspect of life, from the mundane office environment to the seedy or kinky side. And as someone that's become frustrated by how whitewashed mainstream queerness can be, while also appreciating some of the protections mainstreaming affords me, it's kind of nice to have my cake and eat it too in this instance. Before getting too ahead of myself, I should mention that Phantasmagoria 2 is not a perfect game by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of the puzzle design is pretty obtuse, and there are a number of ways to interact with the game that are only seen a couple of times, spread out throughout the entire game so you forget about them. One in particular that I believe only shows up once. But that kind of thing is very classic Sierra. Not saying it's great, but it was the style at the time. What's a little harder for me to ignore is that some of the theming in the game is less than amazing. Some of the mental illness stuff in particular is very rough. The mental institution in the game feels very in line with other campy horror depictions of mental institutions, which is to say that it's not great. The asylum scene can be somewhat defended, as it is a stress hallucination by Curtis from his time in the asylum, and not supposed to literally be a depiction of what an asylum is like. But the mental illness stuff doesn't end there. Curtis and his mom both have what is understood by everyone else in the game as schizophrenia, although that's not exactly accurate. But before getting fully into why that's not accurate, I will say that Curtis's mom in particular has issues that lead to her abusing Curtis in a bunch of different ways, and that's not frequently handled with the utmost care. One of the abuses she inflicts upon him is dressing him up in a dress as a child, which might for some draw up uncomfortable associations with other media that ties such things to queer identity. Although, to the game's credit, Curtis's gender isn't really part of the question, and when he asks his therapist specifically if that abuse influences his current orientation, she immediately refutes that. I personally wouldn't have included that particular piece of abuse, as I don't think it really adds much, and it, as I said before, can draw that comparison. But the abuse is at very least treated as a serious matter in the narrative, which is better than some similar media of the time. Then there's the BDSM stuff, which has a presence in the story that is kind of contentious. It can be viewed as either freeing or corrupting Curtis, depending on how you view it. I personally see it as freeing, considering the hallucinations and even the murders start well before he's aware of the world of kink. It doesn't necessarily help with much besides temporarily distracting him, though. Also, Teresa is not the most responsible BDSM practitioner. They don't, as far as I know, set a safe word, and she ignores him telling her to stop at one point. She also brings an audience in without telling him, all of which is generally frowned upon in BDSM spaces, to my understanding. I've personally never been to a kink club, and I'm not really sure they even ever existed in the way they're depicted in most media, including this game, but I've been friends with people deep in the scene, and from what I understand, a lot of kink spaces tend to be more cognizant of consent stuff because they kind of have to be. I am now going to get into some spoilers, so if you absolutely need to, you can skip ahead, although I don't personally think hearing these would be much of a detriment to playing the game, as the main draw of the game for me is some interesting themes and a lot of camp. Also, if you're at all familiar with genre convention, you'll probably guess a lot of the more spoilery plot beats of this game anyway.
No job is worth this. But Curtis, I want you to stay out of it. I don't want you to get hurt. Curtis, you know I love you.
It's revealed that what is presumed as schizophrenic delusions are actually true. Curtis is an alien, and his mother is the only one that can see it. This is one of those things that is a bit more neutral in a vacuum, as it doesn't on its own suggest anything about mental illness in general, but it is worth paying attention whenever media ties mental illness to the supernatural to see what exactly it's saying. And I don't think this game thought too hard about it. The problem I have with the game are relatively minor in the grand scheme of things. It's one of my favorite games, it's a camp classic, and it's a lot of fun in its own right, plus it's excessively and explicitly queer. I would honestly recommend this game to most people, with the only potential caveat being that if you think how this game handles parental abuse could be a trigger for you, I might stay away from it.
Hear me out. It was 10 years ago that business is taking Mr. Jonathan Harker to Transylvania and the castle of Count Dracula, the vampire. He who is lord over all the Nosferatu. Unknowingly, Mr. Harker arranged for him to be coming here to London, where he is sucking the blood of the innocent Miss Lucy Vestrina, she who was fiancée to Mr. Arthur Holmwood.
This can't be true. But it is.
Another curious example of LGBTQ history in FMV games comes from 1993's Dracula Unleashed, which acts as somewhat of a sequel to the original Bram Stoker novel. The game stars Quincy Morris's younger brother Alexander Morris and invites the return of basically every surviving character from the novel: Jonathan and Mina Harker, Van Helsing, Reinfeld, Arthur Holmwood. Dracula was well in the public domain by this point, so they could kinda do whatever they wanted with the story. The story involves Dracula being brought back by a magic ritual and re-terrorizing the city, most especially the people who were responsible for his death. The pacing is very similar to that of the book, in that Dracula, or vampires in general, don't really show up for a while. It's generally played as a sort of time-gated interactive movie, where you have to see specific scenes by being in specific locations at specific times. This is admittedly not my favorite type of game, but at least this one does a better job letting you know where it wants you to go than other similar games. People frequently give you items and are like, bring this to this person for me, hint hint. It's not perfect, and if you're not using a walkthrough or saves coming, you'll probably get frustrated with the timing and miss some stuff. I also considered doing an accent when I fake quoted the game, but I thought my attempt at a British accent would be the only thing worse than some of the accents in this game, because oh my god, some of the accents in this game.
I needs a drink instead of Saucy Jack when this day's over. Saucy Jack? Haven't you heard of it, Gov? The best pub in the Strand. Me mouth is watering already for a mug of Rebecca's ale.
Count of all the people being killed. Real unnatural like, too. Heads cut off and the bodies all dry of blood.
Hey, I'd lose my head for you, Becky.
Oh, come on.
Strange killings, they is. That woman in white been seen all over London. It's like that Bloofer lady years ago.
Bloofer? What kind of name is that?
Never heard the like afore or since.
Dracula Unleashed entered my radar specifically due to me looking into this topic. The Wikipedia page for LGBT characters in games said that Dracula Unleashed was the first computer game with a speaking role for a gay character, which is a claim I found a little suspect, so I decided to check it out, and the cited source is a Salon article from 2014 saying that the bookstore clerk might be the first gay character with a speaking role. The article had a very short blurb about Dracula Unleashed in its larger timeline, and basically only other thing it said about that character was that he was a barely contained pervert, which I personally didn't get, but there is a moment where he holds Alexander's hand for a smidgen too long, and Alexander looks uncomfortable about it, so I guess. That being said, I don't have specific information that disproves this claim, and if the Wikipedia writer can be that confident about it, then so can I.
How much do I owe you?
A gift from one Lord of Hell to another.
Dracula Unleashed is the first ever speaking role for a gay man in a video game. In playing Dracula Unleashed, you meet up with the bookstore co-owner and primary clerk Alfred Horner, who is clearly implied to be gay, although I didn't find any specific reference to his sexuality in the game. He is one of the people who summons Dracula, so he is a suspect at very least, if not a villain, but he definitely seems more in over his head than like a criminal mastermind. In a way, Dracula Unleashed is toned down from the gayness of the original book. Basically gone is the sexual tension between Dracula and Harker. I mean, Dracula is barely a sexual being in this in general. That's the problem with a sequel to Dracula. If everyone knows who Dracula is, then it makes for less fun cat and mouse Dracula interactions. But, assuming this is the first gay character in a computer game, it definitely deserves a spot in this retrospective.
Oh, that reminds me. I want to give you something that may help. A bottomless bag to carry all the parts in.
Thank you, Bric-a-Brac.
Splendid. And please, feel free to come back here anytime.
Now it's time for the grab bag. This is where I'll be including all the depictions that are either offensive or completely inconsequential. If you don't want to see any of that, you just don't care, you can skip ahead to here. The first game in the grab bag is Toonstruck, which is a great game in its own right. It's actually one of my favorite 90s FMV games. There are fun performances from Christopher Lloyd and Tim Curry. There's a fun Roger Rabbit mixed media aesthetic. And the Roger Rabbit influence, obviously extends further than that, since they cast Christopher Lloyd. The fantastic casting goes beyond just the Hollywood actors that are cast, though. This thing is packed with classic voice actors, including Tris McNier, who has done multiple Simpsons voices since that show started, as well as the voice for Dot in Animaniacs, Dan Castellaneta, the original voice of Homer Simpson, April Winchell, the voice of Clarabelle Cow and Mickey Mouse, and more prominent to me, Miss Finster in Recess, and Jim Cummings, the longtime voice of Pete from Mickey Mouse, as well as Winnie the Pooh. I could go on with this voice cast. It is astounding, and I wanted to point it out to say that most of this game rules.
Short for Big Bad. Catchy.
And practical. Big Bad is a real mouthful.
Another crack like that, my friend, and you'll be the mouthful.
Toonstruck is the story of an animator who no longer feels creatively fulfilled working on what his studio asks him to do, which is continue to work on the Fluffy Fluffy Bun Bun show. He is holding on to the hope that he may one day get to work with the first cartoon he ever drew, which is this little purple guy named Flux. Although this section is not for deep dives and this video is about queer or queer-coded characters, and there are a couple of those in Toonstruck. First up is this scarecrow who you meet in front of the barn, who is not the most respectful caricature I've ever seen in my life.
We're back!
Well, if it isn't the dynamic duo! Nice to see you boys again!
King Hugh has been very kind to me, despite the fact that I'm a stranger to these parts.
Oh yes, he's a darling! But he should really try venturing out into the great outdoors a little more often, don't you think? I mean, that yellow complexion of his just doesn't scream healthy to me.
He wants you to find him another outfit that he would like that he can wear instead of his cloak, which he will trade to you, and you can use the cloak to solve other puzzles down the line. It's an adventure game, that's how they're played. I honestly can't say I'm particularly offended by this. Everything in Toonstruck is excessively cartoony, and there are a few elements that have not aged particularly well, so it makes sense to me. There's another character that doesn't conform to gender expectations in that of the barkeep, who is this tough burly guy, but he wears a tutu and shoves a bowling ball up his ass to bowl. It's obviously a bit more crass than the Scarecrow, but my reaction is mostly the same. Look, it's a 90s game, it's in there, it's not amazing, but I do heartily recommend Toonstruck to people.
Hi guys, I'm Drew Blank, and this is my friend, Flux Wildly.
We're building a machine that's going to save Qtopia.
We're secretly building a machine that's going to save Qtopia.
Oh, jeez. These are the palace guards. You think they don't know what's going on? Building a machine? Utopia?
So, what exactly do you guys do around here?
Let's show him, Sparky. Okie dokie, Chipper. 2, 3, 4. Bippity bip bip bippity ba. Bip boop bip boop bippity ba. Ya da da da. Diddly da. Ya da diddly diddly da.
Another example of caricatured gay stereotypes that comes to us from games comes from the game Harvester, which is quite a bit harder to recommend than Toonstruck for a number of different reasons. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but if everything that's known about the guy who plays the main character of this game is to be believed, he is not a great guy. And when you couple that with some of the edgier elements of Harvester, some things don't look particularly great in hindsight. Harvester is a game that satires 1950s Americana. Every character has their own dirty little secrets. The school system takes punitive discipline to new heights by smashing the kids in the head with a baseball bat when they misbehave. Everyone has their own blend of that old school American racism, sexism, puritanicalism.
You're saying that's all there is to marriage? Cooking and cleaning?
Well, you'll have to ask your father about that, but I'm sure Stephanie will do her duty when the time comes. Bless your innocence, but there are certain disgusting truths that go along with marriage. Facts that can't be disguised by sheets which wrap around the contours of flexing go-go's and bouncing legs. You can't know what I'm talking about, and that's best. When the time comes to make a baby with Stephanie, you'll have to make your peace with the fact that when a farmer plants his seed, he can't help but get some nasty dirt on his hoe.
So, there is room within the framework of the game to talk about sexual orientation. If we're looking at 1950s America and everyone's secrets and everything, then it would make sense that a character might be gay, and that could be explored in a satire like this. What we get instead is that all the firemen in the town act like gay stereotypes. Presumably for some sort of pun on the term flamer, or possibly other fire-related terms for gay people. I am going to show a little bit of this, but keep in mind, it's bad. It's worse than anything in Toonstruck, so I just wanted to give a little bit of warning before showing it.
Hello, Steve. Welcome to the House of Flame, as we like to call it. Oh, cut it out, Spots, honestly. Once he gets barking, a good piece of meat is the only way to shut him up. Don't tell any of the others, but I've secured a bolt of the most divine moth material. I've hidden it because, well, if any of these Marys got a hold of it, it'd be gone in a jiffy. So I'd rather keep it hush-hush. I'm going to make new drapes for the firehouse, and if I have any left, cross your fingers, I'm going to make everyone matching mauve pillow cozies.
As you can see, it's pretty mean-spirited, way more so than Toonstruck. I guess in defense of Harvester, you can say that everything in Harvester is pretty ugly and cynical and mean-spirited, and that excess acts as the satire, but to counter that, I'm not really sure to what end this particular commentary functions besides just being an offensive stereotype. Honestly, the game Harvester has fascinated me for a long time as being this weird convergence between having something to say and also being just extremely tasteless and mean-spirited, so I might return to it someday and give it a full retrospective or something.
And my name's Edna Fitzpatrick. I'm not the one with amnesia.
Then you believe me.
Well, you always were a kidder, Steve.
You always were a kidder, Steve.
Well, you always were a kidder, Steve.
Another grab bag game that probably has enough content to make its own entry is Police Quest 4 Open Season. The problem with that content is that it's not particularly good gay representation. It is extraordinarily tasteless, basically all the way through. Also, Police Quest 4 is produced differently than the other FMV games on this list. The footage is so digitized that it almost looks like graphics other than live-action footage, but you can see the FMV underneath everything, and you can see that it is done with actors, so I think that it counts. Police Quest Open Season is the 4th Police Quest game, and Police Quest is somewhat of a spin-off of King's Quest and Space Quest, but there's not really a need to go too much deeper than that, since Police Quest 4 has nothing to do with any of those games. Not even the other Police Quest games, as it's the first Police Quest game that did not feature main character Sonny Bonds and was not directed by series director Jim Walls. Police Quest 4 is a gritty police drama featuring Detective John Kerry investigating the serial killer as well as the murder of his former partner and friend Bob Hickman. It was apparently made in cooperation with the former chief of the LAPD, so that's something, I guess. The first piece of queer rap you have in the game is this dude, who's hanging outside of a titty bar and record shop. That is, the space between a titty bar and a record shop, not a combination titty bar and record shop.
Hey, handsome. Looking for a girl or a boy? Oh!
I'm Detective Carey, LAPD. I'm looking to ask some questions about what's been going on in this neighborhood.
Oh, darling, ask away. I just love the gossip.
This guy acts in a stereotypical fashion for a second and then tells you not much of value to the investigation. And if you were wondering if Police Quest 4 displays every minority group with this level of sensitivity and care, don't worry, they do.
LAPD, I'd like to ask you a question or two.
Whatever, man. I'm just hanging.
Let's start with your name. What is it, and do you live in the neighborhood, or are you just visiting?
Man, this be my hood.
You smart. You know a good buy when you see it. You shop here again.
Look, I admittedly was already kind of biased against the cop game going in, and it certainly didn't do itself any favors with its colorful characterization of anyone that wasn't a straight white man. Really not dispelling my ideas on what the police are like. But I guess to be fair, the police chief does say in interviews that he advised against this depiction of racial minorities at very least, so I guess that's something.
I'll have you know I've had dozens of calls this morning on you shoving that reporter yesterday. Everybody in town, from the chief to the mayor to outraged Joe citizen, saw you push her. Damn, you were all over the news.
Lieutenant, it wasn't...
Besides you appearing uncooperative, you were downright politically incorrect.
The central mystery of Police Quest 4 is relatively compelling as well. It does give you the detective fantasy of getting to solve a crime, and you can examine the crime scene and follow leads and figure out the mystery. And like any good mystery, the culprit turns out to be a random person you don't meet until near the end of the game.
Oh my! Oh no! Oh my! It's horrible. All this crying has made me thirsty. How about you? Would you like something to drink? Please, have a cup of tea on the house.
Spoiler alert, I guess, but yeah, you know that they're the culprit and a real sicko because they're a cross-dresser or a drag queen or possibly a really bad depiction of a trans woman. And it really sets itself apart from other examples of this already pretty problematic trope, because this character gets no backstory and very little screen time, even less than they usually do. I think this was going for like a Silence of the Lambs thing, but they just don't do it particularly well. I mean, the killer literally cuts body parts off their victims, so it seems like a pretty decent guess. Should you play Police Quest 4? I would start with the other Police Quest games first, or maybe LA Noire, or if you want another FMV game, Contradiction Spot the Liar is great, if you want that detective gameplay. So, yeah, I don't know. It's up to you. It's not terrible, but there's a lot of things that are not great about it. And to close out the grab bag, I started playing this 1996 game called Gothos about vampires. You can choose your avatar between these four somewhat alternative-looking white people, and no matter who you choose as your avatar, you will be propositioned by, at very least, this lady, but probably other people throughout the game. It's kind of charming. It's progressive in the way that, like, old Sims games are progressive, where you can kind of flirt with anyone because that was just easier to program than people with specific preferences.
I don't know what your preference is, but does that really matter?
It should.
Come on, sugar. Don't be shy.
It's just, I've never
paid
for it.
You couldn't afford me anyway, deadbeat.
Very good. Gabriel Knight. Gabriel, like the angel. Join us. My name is von Glover. Baron Friedrich von Glover.
But Baron...
Herr Knight is right. We mustn't be so stuffy. I'm formally inviting him. Come.
The last game that I want to talk about that fits the bill in a huge way is Gabriel Knight 2: The Beast Within, or The Beast Within: A Gabriel Knight Mystery. But I'm just going to keep calling it Gabriel Knight 2 from here on out for the sake of brevity. Gabriel Knight 2 is a game from a franchise that I've known about for years. We actually had the first Gabriel Knight on our home PC when I was a child. I had even known about Gabriel Knight 2 specifically as an FMV game for a while, even before I became interested in FMV games, because I think I saw it in like one of those early 2000s look at this wacky 90's game videos that used to be very popular. And to be fair, the game is pretty wacky. I didn't really see it in action until Nextlander did a playthrough, because I am nothing if not consistent. And the whole time I was watching this playthrough, I couldn't help but go, whoa, how is this game this heavy on gay subtext? Which makes sense, seeing as the writer of the game, Jane Jensen, now writes mostly romance novels, including a large number of gay romance. Gabriel Knight 2 is specifically a game about werewolves in Germany, which is maybe a bit of a jump from the first game being about voodoo murders in New Orleans, but it makes sense as positioning Gabriel Knight as the new episodic hero, like a Tex Murphy or a Nancy Drew, who could go around and solve mysteries all around the world to get inspiration for his various books, because Gabriel Knight's a writer. And by the way, Jane Jensen still seems to kind of want to do this with the character of Gabriel Knight. She has ideas, or at very least has the desire to write a 4 and 5, but she seems sick of just dealing with the companies and rights holders and all that shit, which is totally fair in my opinion. I get it. The other major character in the Gabriel Knight series is his assistant, Grace Nakamura, who is a historian, has a PhD in history and classics, and she helps him with the historical aspects of his cases. In Gabriel Knight 2, there's a wolf terrorizing the German countryside that the people think is a werewolf, and Gabriel Knight gets hired to deal with it as the new Schattenjäger, which is like a German witch hunter or supernatural detective. It's a term that was made up specifically for the game. Gabriel is apparently the last remaining member of the Ritter family, which is a prominent German family of Schattenjägers. So he inherits the position as well as a mansion and a pretty large monetary inheritance as well.
Your family owns Schloss Ritter in Rittersberg?
Why, yes. Yes, we do.
I'm sorry if I have been rude. For an American of your type, well, I bow to your lineage, Herr Knight.
Think nothing of it, old man.
The game is split into two halves. Half where you're playing as Gabriel around where the murders took place investigating them, and the other half where you're playing as Grace Nakamura hanging out around the Ritter mansion, trying to investigate the mystery of King Ludwig II and how it pertains to the case that Gabriel is currently working. The cool thing about this game being set in Germany is that you guys get to listen to me try to pronounce a lot of German names, so get ready for that. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Herr Knight, this is Baron von Zell. Herr Dr. Klingman.
We've met. I'll be darned. Small world, hey, Doc?
The distinguished gentleman at the bar is Herr von Eigner.
A pleasure, Herr Knight.
Next to him, Herr Hannemann.
The queerness in the game comes from two primary sources. They aren't the only people implied to be gay, but it is very heavy with them, and all the other sources are in relation to one of the two. Those sources are the character of Baron von Glauer and the historical figure King Ludwig II of Bavaria, who is a real historical figure and, according to Gabriel Knight too, considered the last real king of Bavaria. King Ludwig II is a solid through-line throughout the entire game. His story is uncovered as it pertains to what is happening in Gabriel's story, and his sexual orientation is never seriously even contested by the story. A historian that you speak to about him blatantly says he's understood by historians as gay, and many think the guilt over that drove him mad. The historian actually offers a counter to this in that he thinks that his madness and reclusivity came from his loneliness and not guilt over his sexual orientation, but none of that obviously deflects from the fact that he is gay, which the historian also definitively believes. I'm using some amount of qualifiers as we're talking about a real historical figure, and it was never explicitly said in historical text as far as I know, so we'll never definitively know for sure, but we kinda know. The historian also says this when asked about why he identifies so strongly with Ludwig II.
He was a romantic, you know, a dreamer. And he was misunderstood, maligned.
Sounds like you can relate.
Me? Hell, I have it easy. At least I live in the 1990s. And not every eye in the country is on me. But yes, I can relate.
This isn't super important to anything, but it is a nice little moment, and it also implies to me that the historian is gay, so if you're keeping score at home, that's another one. Where Ludwig II comes into play in this story is that it's also implied that he is inflicted with the same werewolf line as the main werewolves in the game. This is said to be the reasoning for his later eccentricities, although this also does not diminish from his sexuality. That is basically taken to be self-evidently true by the story. If you need to see evidence of that homosexuality, you can see it in basically all the writing showcased in the game. Here's a passage about how he showers gifts on young men that take his fancy in a totally heterosexual way.
Other than his long-standing friendship with the Empress Elizabeth of Austria and with his mother, the relationships Ludwig attempted with others were nearly always a disappointment for him and a bewilderment for his partners. He would become obsessed with someone, a singer, an artist, a nobleman or a peasant, and would bombard them with gifts, praise, and favors. When they would fail to return the depths of rapturous passion he required, the singular adoration and humble obedience he expected, he would grow disappointed and cut himself off from them. The objects of his interest were occasionally women, usually ones he fell in love with after seeing them in idealized roles on the stage, but they were more often young men who fit his fantasies of the heroic sagas like Lohengrin and Parsifal that he so loved.
Werewolfism is used throughout Gabriel Knight 2 as a metaphor, which it frequently is in werewolf stories. Particularly in this game, it's used as a metaphor for unleashing desire, which is not a particularly new trope, but always effective. Throughout this story, that desire has primarily to do with passionate, non-gender constrained romance, the poster boy for which is the previously mentioned Baron von Glauer. Von Glauer is a fantastic character. He's almost so great that he brings down other elements of the game because his charisma is so palpable that its absence is felt, and I occasionally felt myself going through the motions to get to the next Von Glauer scene. Basically, any time Von Glauer isn't on screen, everyone should be asking, where's Von Glauer?
Nature can seem cruel, but it is orderly. It does not waste or torture, not like this. And with the club, espousing what we do, our philosophy does not support this kind of thing.
I'm sure that's true.
I apologize. It's just, I am concerned that we are not put in the best of light under these circumstances. To promote hunting when these atrocities in the papers. You must understand, the nature I promote is not a murderer. When a healthy beast kills, it takes only what it needs to survive, and it does so respectfully. It is only the man who is capable of such a pointless slaughter.
He is the leader of some hunting club for exclusively people from high German families living in the area that Gabriel has to infiltrate as part of his investigation. The hunting club also has this overarching philosophy about returning to nature to return to our primal selves. This is so that they can increase the instincts and senses that are dulled by society and then bring that with them back into the real world or something. The club philosophy is mostly used by the members to just do whatever they want without societal consequences, which mostly means just drinking however much they want or having sex with whoever they want whenever they want. The only person who really seems to believe the club philosophy at first is Von Glauer, which begins to make more sense as you get further into the game. The first thing you'll probably notice upon meeting the Baron is that he has thick sexual chemistry with Gabriel. To prove this, I quite honestly could play just about any scene they're in together, but I think this interaction they have after Von Glauer sends Gabriel off with a woman who came over to his house for a date is gonna be proof enough for most people. And it goes beyond that. Literally the stock animation of Gabriel saying goodbye to the Baron when he leaves his house is sexually charged. These elements are so numerous and so reciprocated that they begin to make it feel like Gabriel himself feels at least open to the idea. It doesn't help that his chemistry with the actual prominent woman in the story, Grace, is basically nil, and that's almost entirely on Gabriel. Like, Grace gives this fun tsundere energy, where it's obvious she has feelings for Gabriel that she's hiding under the veneer of Gabriel needs me because he's useless without me. And she conveys this fine without them sharing any scenes together, but I do not get the same energy from Gabriel. In his inner monologues and interactions about Grace with others, he seems more annoyed by her than protective of her, which I think protective is the energy they're shooting for. By contrast to that, Gabriel's ease and affection with von Glauer really stands out. Aside from the tension with Gabriel, von Glauer also makes reference to himself that point to his sexuality, like when he says some people weren't meant to have kids when he's talking to Gabriel about family. You can also point to how he talks about his relationship with Von Zell, another member of the hunting club. He says their relationship is special, and doesn't make sense to others, in that they had sort of a breakup and now Von Zell seems jealous of Gabriel.
Von Zell gets territorial. I'm tired of it, frankly.
A lot of this is explicitly in the story about werewolf-related stuff, but essentially everything werewolf-related everywhere is subtext, and especially in this story. I think most people can see how it comes across. You don't necessarily need a spyglass to find this subtext. There's more to say about the theming and story of Gabriel Knight 2 and how it comes together in the ending, but before doing that, I'm going to talk about some things that I don't love about the game, because I don't really want to end on those since that's not really what this video is about. Unlike Phantasmagoria 2, I don't unequivocally recommend Gabriel Knight 2 based on my own tastes. And that's not even for, any grandiose thematic reasons. We're talking about, some gameplay gripes and story pacing issues that frustrated me quite a bit through the course of playing it. But before getting into my personal frustrations, I do want to talk about some things that might be an issue for some people, but were not an issue for me. First of all, the acting. I actually think the acting is pretty good in terms of FMV acting, but there are some choices that are made that might be a little distracting for some. I didn't talk about the acting in Phantasmagoria 2, so I'll say that while some of the side performances in that game are kind of strange, the main cast performances of Curtis, Jacqueline, and Trevor are all pretty great, and really get you through the bulk of that game. Now, if you had caught me at the start of making this video, I might have said that Gabriel Knight has the opposite problem, where the main character's performance is bad even though there are a lot of good side character performances. But I've changed my stance on that. I think Dean Erickson, who plays Gabriel Knight in the game, is giving a different type of performance than everyone else, so it stands out and becomes more noticeable. Erickson, along with the characters of the Smiths, are giving these campy B-movie performances, while everyone else, including Joan Takahashi, who's playing Grace, are essentially doing soap opera performances.
But what I won't put up with is this assisting the Schottenjäger crap. I gave up school to work on this stuff because I thought it was important. I'm doing the research that Gabriel wanted, and so help me, I'm going to be doing more than just research this time around. And I'm not going to sit around and wait for him to call and give me permission. And if you don't like it, it's just too damn bad!
Okay, fine. You do the damn research.
And it's that contrast that sticks out. And even if you don't particularly love the choice, it was definitively an acting choice that was made by someone, whether it was Dean Erickson or the director or someone decided to play it that way. And I really like it. I think it's frequently funny. Some of my favorite moments in the game come from watching Dean Erickson play this cartoon character who stumbled into the general hospital.
And how come paw prints found at the scene indicate an animal much larger than the zoo wolf species Canis lupus?
Und fragt, wieso die Pfotenabdrücke am Tatort viel größer sind als die der Zoowölfe. How did you get this information?
Well... All right! You have my attention. Now, who are you?
I'm Gabriel Knight. I'm the American novelist. I've been by your station to see you, but funny thing, they would not let me in.
All right. I'll see you at the station later, but only if you agree to get out of here and not talk to the boys.
You got it.
The bigger complaints I personally have is stuff that is more frustrating than funny to me. From very small things like the occasional long hallway you have to walk all the way back and forth across for certain puzzles, to the puzzles themselves. I mentioned that obtuse puzzles were a Sierra staple, and they're certainly not absent here. Some of the most obtuse puzzle design also coincides with some of the most patience-requiring story pacing. There is a section in Chapter 4 where I almost gave up capturing for the video, where you have to visit 3 different museums for information on Ludwig II, but it won't let you move on until you interact with every little thing at every museum. And look, I like a museum, and I like how Ludwig II is used in the story, but it was a lot. You can see in the footage I collected for this video, me getting frustrated that despite the fact that I had played the game before and was not only dedicatedly using one walkthrough, but had a second walkthrough open specifically for this section, I was still getting stuck. Honestly, I basically wrote this whole problem section just to complain about the 3 museums chapter. The ending of the wolf maze was also frustrating, but it at very least felt like a real puzzle that I could feasibly have figured out if I had given myself more time, whereas the 3 museum section just felt like a test of my patience. And yes, I'm overreacting a little bit, but these sections really did annoy me that much. They are a lot longer than they may appear to be, and they really break up the pace of the story, which was frustrating because I really like the story of this game. And speaking of that ridiculous wolf puzzle near the ending of the game, I think it's time to talk about how the obvious subtext of the game could point to a negative interpretation of its ending. Which means it's time for heavy spoilers. Now, again, I don't really think it matters very much. I think you could still have a lot of fun with this game even if you know the spoilers. Also, the game is more than 20 years old at this point. Plus, I think the museum section is actually a bigger deterrent to actually playing the game than knowing the ending. But if you do want to avoid such a thing, then you can skip to the time code above, or below, or wherever the time code's going to be. The good ending of Gabriel Knight 2, which is basically the only ending which is in a fail state, is Grace and Gabriel standing and talking about the adventure they just had by this cliff. Grace asks how Gabriel felt about Von Glauer, and Gabriel says this.
I liked him. Haven't you ever wished you could just follow your instincts? Live for the moment?
Yes.
That was Von Glauer.
Von Glauer? Was that pit of bodies? Ludwig's suicide. There's always a price, Gabriel. Don't you know that by now?
I made my choice, Gracie.
So you did. Do you know why?
I guess when it comes right down to where the buck stops, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be like that, Gracie.
given the subtext of the game, I do believe that it's possible to read this as a need to suppress his homosexuality. Now, I personally think it's more a suppression of the primal animal desire that the club touted in favor of being a part of society, which, unfortunately for Gabriel, might include the potential for a passionate love affair with the Baron. And while part of me was sad to see that relationship go, continuing it would mean Gabriel being a werewolf, maybe, which is morally dubious and also would be hard to fit around the future games if this one doesn't do particularly well. So I don't really have any major issues with Gabriel's ending. Anything that I don't love about it can be blamed mostly on genre conventions. I didn't, however, love Grace's ending, though, as I personally felt a good ending for Grace in this game may be counter to the good of the franchise. Grace says at the end of the game that she's leaving Gabriel's employ, and she wants to pursue her own goals and passions in becoming a historian, and Gabriel begs her to stay. He says he only discluded her to protect her, and he needs her, and I don't think Grace gives him a clear answer, but it kind of seems like the answer is they do love each other, and that she is going to stay in his employ. The problem I have with this ending is that I never got the impression that he did love her for much time in the game. I'm sure there are people to whom the answer would always be to pursue career goals over the potential for a relationship, and for others, the answer might be to always believe in love. All you need is love. You get it. I am in neither of those camps. From my impression in this instance, I feel the thematically appropriate ending for Grace would be to realize that Gabriel doesn't properly value her as a colleague, nor reciprocate her feelings for him, so she needs to move on with her life. To be fair to this series, though, I haven't played 3, and I don't know the journey she takes, so I might be right on the money with that guess. Gabriel Knight 2 is a great game. It's very gay. The subtext is really heavy. If you feel like you might be frustrated playing it yourself, then I suggest watching a playthrough or something, either like a YouTube long play or the Nextlander playthrough I really enjoyed. But yeah, it's great. Also, another shout out to the Conversations with Curtis YouTube channel and their interview with Jane Jensen. I used that to get some of the information for this section. It's a cool interview. I really enjoyed it.
Guten Abend.
Guten, how are you? Is this the castle of the shot and joggers here?
Yes, but
How exciting! Come along, Emma.
we are so thrilled to be here.
It's interactive.
It's all totally real. No cartoon characters. You're shooting at real targets.
Keep in mind that this list is far from comprehensive, probably. A comprehensive list would be tough to do even if I wasn't working with a lot of abandonware, and a lot of these games are really tough to get running. I personally had a lot of games that I wanted to try out, but simply couldn't get to work. So, is there a through line here? Well, this is anecdotal, but FMV games seem to have an extraordinarily gay audience. Some of the people I have spoken to who are the most passionate about FMV games have been trans women and non-binary people. This is probably partially because gays love camp, and there is a ton of camp to be found in classic FMV games. But I definitely don't think it hurts that in a time where there was little out there showing a gay experience in video games, these games were excessively gay. FMV games are making somewhat of a resurgent in the modern day, the FMV renaissance, as it were, and I can't help but notice that those games can lean pretty gay heavy. even some of the queerest mainstream games have been in the style of interactive movies that can date their lineage largely to early FMV games. I might be overstating things here, but I truly believe that FMV games invented gay people. Okay, that was a joke. To be clear, that was a joke. But honestly, I do think that these games had an impact, at least on a micro level, on a few individuals or something. I also just think that they're pretty cool and worth talking about and celebrating. I just really like FMV games, okay? Thanks for indulging me.
I'm gonna do you like I do my homework. Quick!
He's a fan. In a black leather jacket, he's a gem. In a black leather jacket, he's a fan. In a black leather jacket, and I wanna take him home with me. Fan, 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 fan me. Fan, 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 fan me. Fan, 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 fan.